Going 9 on News Radio. Chris Merrill, your host. The Podcast Awards, the iHeartRadio Podcast Awards, coming up here at 8 o'clock. And so we're doing a little bit of a build-up to those Podcast Awards. Told you a little bit about what the podcast is, and it's basically like you've heard from radio before or any sort of a digital message. It's just on a wider distribution platform, but to a very narrow audience. And this is unique because in the past, on a wide distribution platform, you were talking to a wide audience, whereas now the audience doesn't have one particular source. Now it's got numerous sources. And so podcasts are getting more and more narrow. They're tailoring to very specific tastes. Joining us now is Omar Velasquez, who is working with us here at iHeartRadio, but also working on the side on his own podcast and trying to build that up. And he's got sort of a narrow podcast and a narrow focus on that podcast, which, when it comes to podcasting, is considered a good thing. Omar, welcome to the program, man. Thanks for being on terrestrial, boring, old-fashioned radio, bud.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me. Appreciate this.
Yeah. Tell me about your podcast. What's it about? When did you start it? All that stuff.
Basically, the iPodcast I started in 2014. It's a music-based podcast where I interview local artists, local creatives, and I talk to them about their backstory of why they became an artist and why are they doing the things they are doing.
So how many episodes have you cut then? You've been working on this for almost 5 years.
Yes. Right now I'm in season 3, actually. Broken down into season 3, two seasons because I don't want to keep going.
Right.
So right now I'm on episode 98, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I haven't yet got to 100 yet. It took me a while, but I'm getting there.
So are these 98 different artists that you brought in, or is this have you kind of returned to some of the good ones and brought them back for additional stories?
These are all new artists. I try to change it up every single episode.
Yeah.
There's been some recurring artists who have stopped by the podcast.
And these are all local?
Yes, all local artists from Imperial Valley to San Diego, California, and a little bit of LA.
Wow.
Yes.
How do you get the word out to try to get these guests? Are they all looking for publicity wherever they can get it, or do you have to kind of twist some arms?
Social media. Social media plays a big factor in the podcasting world as far as advertising. That's where I'm learning the advertising from is social media. That's how we get the word out there is Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and pretty much all social media.
When did you first get the idea, hey, I want to do this podcast thing?
Well, I love radio, you guys. I mean, I'm a radio fan, terrestrial radio. I love radio. I grew up listening to radio. And you can't listen to radio on the go. And then podcasting started coming around, and a bunch of comedians say, hey, check out my podcast. And I was like, what is a podcast? And I realized that you can listen to radio not while listening to radio. You could take it on the go. So that's what podcasting was. And that's
like on demand, right?
On demand, there you go.
Yeah.
So that's when I got into it. I was like, okay, this is awesome. I noticed that a lot of comedians started doing podcasting, and it's a more free form type of audio. And that's really got my attention, was the free form, the creativity of the podcast free form of it.
How did you settle on doing a podcast that focused on local artists?
Passion. That comes from passion. I'm an artist myself. Mm-hmm. I like to know who's doing music out there, who's actually recording, writing songs. So by me interviewing them, I'll be able to discover new music.
Talking with Omar Velasquez, who's one of our coworkers here at iHeartRadio. He's come aboard here recently, and he's been doing this podcast for about 5 years that focuses on these local artists. So in this case, you said, I want to do a podcast and I like local artists, or do you say, I like local artists, hey, I ought to do a podcast about it? Which came first, the chicken or the egg in this case?
I would say the chicken. I'm an artist first.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm an artist first, so I want to do a podcast about artists.
How do you measure your downloads? Where do people find you? What's kind of the technicals behind the scene?
Yeah, the analytics is pretty tough.
Okay.
But for right now, I'm going off my website domain. I go with Squarespace, and they have a good analytics numbers out there of who presses play and who visits my website. But it's a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination of numbers with YouTube numbers, Instagram numbers, iTunes numbers. So it's a combination of all those things. And yes.
Well, why are you in the studio here? I mean, you're a podcast guy. You're building up the podcast. How come you're hanging out at the iHeart Studios?
Because I feel like radio and podcasting are brother and sister. It's A and B. So there's so much that I can learn from radio that I could apply to podcasting. And
like what? Like what is it you're looking to pick up?
Commercials, advertisements. That's a big topic nowadays, is how to get advertisements on the podcasting. And so I feel like learning the advertising side of radio while being here, also doing production work for iHeartRadio, learn the traits as far as how to get advertisements for your podcast and for a platform like this.
Has that have you found any success with that, or are you just kind of running around picking up coffee from and the other guys that are producing shows?
I'm not in a hurry. To be honest with you, I'm not in a hurry to push.
That's a very diplomatic answer. Look at that.
Yeah.
Look at that, Emiliano. Go get me coffee.
Oh, we're really going to go down that road. Okay.
I'm really grateful for being here. The fact that they took me in. I know I'm going to learn so much, and I'm really grateful for being at iHeartRadio.
So Omar Velasquez, who's got a podcast that he's working on and been working on it for about 5 years, joining us here as we build up to the iHeartRadio Podcast Awards starting at 8 o'clock. You'll hear him live on. When you got started, tell me about the beginnings of what you started with. Was it a laptop and a portable mic? What did you start with? And then what do you have now?
Originally, I used to record bands. So I know about mixers. I know about computers. I know about Adobe Audition. I know about cables, inputs, outputs. So I have a passion in recording. So I had the mixer, I had the laptop. So I was like, okay, well, my friends aren't here. I might as well just start a podcast. All I need is my voice and some content per se.
Yeah.
And I just press record, and I went for let's see if I could do 5 minutes of me, I guess you would call riffing.
Yeah.
You know, if I could riff for 5 minutes and time myself, practice, and I would throw in a little bit of music. And I was like, hey, well, let me try to get some interviews in. And then went from there. But I started with a laptop, started with a 6 plug-in mixer, a USB, and I went from there. Adobe Audition, press record, and the rest is history.
Have you found it easier to upload your podcast, to go through the technical side? Because I remember when podcasting first came out, it was a bit daunting. I was a bit confused by sort of how to get involved with it. But it seems like it's so much easier if somebody wants to try to sign up now to start their own podcast.
It is easier now. I feel like it is a lot easier now, but at the same time, it's still hard. There's still some knowledge behind it. Where you can, how do you upload the podcast itself onto iTunes or YouTube? There's a whole process getting it to a feed such as and getting analytics and stuff like that. So there is, it's still difficult. I would say it's still difficult. I mean, not anybody can do it, but in a sense, anyone can do it.
Yeah, they just have to sort of be pointed in the right direction, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Correct. What have you found to be the most challenging over the course of the last 5 years?
Gaining an audience. I mean, that's pretty tough. Gaining an audience is pretty tough. But like you said, as long as we promote and as long as we go to shows and hand out flyers the old school way and online social media, it's just gaining that audience and the content also.
Is that what you do? Let's talk about content here in a second, but is that what you're doing with the guerrilla marketing? I mean, you're still doing it like the bands would do it, right? You're going out there and handing out flyers. Check out our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. The word has to get out there. I mean, word of mouth in a sense, but also flyers going to shows like Tower Bar here in San Diego or Tattoo Club or Brick by Brick. All these local venues have local shows where they bring local bands, and that's a good way to get your word out there.
So for yours, which is very specific because we're talking about the local music scene, right?
Yes.
With that, do you record some of their live shows and then play back portions of that on your podcast?
Yeah, that's a little snippet that I would like to do, or a little sample I'll try to do. I'll take my little portable recorder and be the guy recording the audio. And yeah, I try to play some of their live music on the podcast as well.
So let's talk then about that content. When you invite somebody into the studio, do you give them any direction, or you just say, sit down, there's your microphone, and then you take off?
I try to give a little 30-minute like introduction, pre-production, I guess you would say. We talk a little bit, and then like, say, this is what I'm going to do, talk about this, talk about that. But once you press record, all bets are off.
Do you edit the podcast at all afterward, or is it just, it's as though it's live on the air?
It's just, it's like it's live on the air.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I try not to do no editing. But Emiliano, he told me we have to edit. I mean, we have to edit because
you have to edit.
No, you don't.
I agree.
Everybody has to edit. I don't care. Anyone's been broadcasting for 50 years or for 5 minutes.
No.
Everybody, even Johnny Carson had to edit.
No, you don't edit. You let it be. You let it be on a podcast.
My God.
You don't have FCC rules you have to look out for. You
It's
just
not
let
FCC
it go.
Rules. It's the cognition of how people listen. You have to edit.
No, you have to be prepared, and that's what Omar's talking about. He says he does a 30-minute pre-interview, so he knows where he's going with this, and then the guest knows where they're going too.
All right. Well, let's listen to some of Omar's stuff, shall we?
Fine.
first off, we're Omar. How can
edit this out? Cut this part out. This is terrible. I thought you were going to press play. That was a good lead-in. EL.
How does someone listen to your podcast? Where's it at?
You can find us on Google, iPodcast, iPodcast.com. That's
okay.
IATE.
Thank you. It sounded like I
know. IATE podcast.
IATE podcast.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to be like any regular listener. I'm just going to pop in and just play something.
Okay.
And then we'll see if we can easily figure out. So,
all right.
Here we go.
So what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the iMusic Podcast. For now, we just heard Midnight Lurkers, right?
We're Midnight Lurkers,
man.
All
right, and Midnight Lurkers is by an artist out here from Calipat, I want to say.
I'm from Calipat, bro. Yeah. I live in Brawley, but I represent Calipat.
Right.
That's my heart.
I got in studio right now, Ace the Big.
Woo.
How's it going, man? How you doing, man? Everybody in the background. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Nah, I'm doing good, dude.
Yeah. I got also in the studio, guys, homie Christian.
My homie Christian, BD, right here. It's my brother.
Nice.
All right, so it sounds like you guys kill that, EL. That's good. So it sounds like you guys are kind of having fun. It sounds like a very laid back atmosphere. Is that the vibe you're going for?
Yes, correct. That's exactly what I'm going for.
But do you know what they're talking about?
Well, so far they're just talking about who they are.
Okay, all right. Let's get.
Well, I mean, come on. I mean, the basis of his show is that it's local artists. We know it's going to be about the local artists.
Understood, but I have looked at this. I've researched ratings. I have looked at focus groups. I've seen how people cognitively listen to stuff. And basically, when you start speaking, you have 8 to 12 seconds for people to invest in you.
Now, in the podcast, I already invested in downloading it.
Oh, my God.
It's different. I'm telling you. You know what? It is. It absolutely is. I'll tell you what we're going to do. Omar,
yes.
I have talked with the vice president of talk programming for iHeartRadio. He's also big with this podcasting stuff. I'm going to invite him into the studio, and we'll see exactly what he says about Emiliano's old school way of thinking about this medium in just a few moments. Sound good?
Perfect.
Thanks for being on the program, man. Much appreciated.